and welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast with me, your host, Dr. Ffyon Davies. In this podcast, we're diving back into Kilimanjaro Diaries. This is part 2 of the 2-part series, and you may remember that we left part 1 on a little bit of a cliffhanger, pun intended, as myself and fellow medic on the mountain, Dr. Francis Screech, were about to attempt Barranco Wall and to make our summit attempt also. So let's dive back into the action as we listen to my thoughts and feelings recorded in a voice memo on the mountain about Barranco Wall and the summit attempt. So then we had the next day, which actually I think was a bit of a highlight for us, wasn't it? It was quite fun.
We loved it.
Going up the Barranco Wall.
If you've got a bit of an outdoorsy bone in your body, then definitely the Barranco Wall, I think, is a highlight. A bit more technical and fun, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Okay, let's hear about it. Let's see what I've got to say.
Barranco to Barafu camp. So we start in the morning nice and early, as always, 5:30 wake up, and we climb Barranco Wall. Just a really cool little scrambly bit. Lots of hands involved, lots of cool footwork, kind of polished rock in places, quite steep, quite vertical, and it was quite a challenge for people who had a problem with heights. But they managed to do it, so really proud of everyone. And we had a really nice view at the top. We had to move super slow because it was so vertical, and we were all struggling to catch our breath. We then had a little bit of up and down, kind of undulating ascent and descent across sort of alpine desert before we got to Karanga camp, which is where we had lunch. And normally in the 7-day Machame route, you would stop at the Karanga camp and you would stay a night and acclimatise. We didn't do this. We carried on to Barafu base camp, which is where we were going to start our summit night from. And I think in retrospect, that would have been quite nice to have a 7-day route and to have a little bit more time to acclimatise. The climb up to Karanga was quite steep. It's quite a sort of 20-minute incline before you get up to Karanga, which is about 4,600, I think, in total.
I mean, I think we can talk around when to send somebody down, essentially, because I think, didn't you have to send somebody down? Was it this day?
Or? I did, yeah. So I did send somebody down, and I think that was one of the bits that I was most dreading. So I think this is one of the bits I find hardest of medicine as well. I naturally am a people pleaser, or tried to be. And I think telling someone that they couldn't ascend on something that especially our group, because they'd, the same as yours, had been waiting since pre-COVID to go on this adventure, then to tell them they needed to go down was something I was dreading. And my chap, it sounds quite similar to yours, to be honest, but he'd had a thumping headache for most of the day, and we'd been trying sort of paracetamol, ibuprofen. I'd been very strict on his fluid, so sort of upwards of 4 to 5 litres. And then when he got there, he went to have a very sensible rest, and he still felt rubbish. So I went to go and see him, and he had SATs in the low 70s, lots of features of now severe AMS, and he was also quite tachycardic. So I said to him he needed to go down, and to be honest, it wasn't the response I was expecting. I was expecting maybe a bit of a battle, or him to be incredibly upset, but I think it was, by that point, he did feel pretty unwell, so it was actually relief. And because the joy of altitude medicine is that you can usually pretty much promise people that once they've descended, lots of these things are going to get better, which obviously lots of medicine, that's a much slower process, but they make such huge recoveries with sort of a few hundred meters of descent, don't they?
So I am still young and green, but when I was younger and greener, I made an attempt on Mont Blanc and got, I would say, probably moderate AMS. I wasn't quite throwing up, but I had a pretty bad headache that wasn't getting better with painkillers. And I remember the feeling as we started going down of feeling better every single step I took down the mountain.
Wow.
I started feeling better. I was like, this
That's
is
amazing.
getting easier. This is getting better. My head's feeling better. It is magical. Descent.
Yeah, I find that's actually quite reassuring. I think that is one of the horrible ascent profile for Kilimanjaro. One of the few kind of positives of that is it means that it's very easy to lose a lot of altitude quite quickly if you need to get somebody down, isn't it? Whereas other places like the Alps, the Himalayas, it's often not that easy. If there's a long traverse or something, then to get down substantial altitude can be really hard.
And I remember a lot of the camps have got sort of shortcuts down, haven't they? Like it's kind of a loop that you do around. So you get up to Shira Camp and then you do a sort of circuit round to Barafu, and then you kind of summit from Barafu. But they've all kind of got little shortcuts down that you can send people down if you need to. And so then the decision to send somebody down is quite hard, I think. But if it's not getting better after a bit of rest or after some painkillers, and if it might, my particular person was already on double Diamox, so there was really limited stuff I could do from there, then it kind of have to tell them to go down. But I think it's quite nice if you can make it a joint decision, so
absolutely
you can bit of shared decision making. I try and do this
completely
as well. But you kind of tell them, this is the situation, this is what I think is going to happen. What are your thoughts? Do you want to continue? Do you not want to continue? Where is your head at, sort of thing? Because often I think as well, like you said, people are quite relieved when you say, right, you're medically advised to go down, because it's not giving up. It's not saying,
exactly,
I couldn't do it, couldn't make it. I was told to go down by the doctor. It's kind of an out.
Yeah, it is an out, isn't it? And it's almost, even though you're involving them, I found they want some degree of the kind of old school paternalistic healthcare where a decision is being it's made with them, but also maybe aspects of it taken out of their hands, where you say, it actually isn't safe for you to ascend anymore. I think for anyone listening who is imminently going to some of the big mountains, that discussion, I think it's really important. Even though there isn't a lot of privacy on expeditions, I think you should have that discussion. I find it very useful to have the tent mate leave, because there's a lot of kind of motivation, and this was a fundraising attempt and things, and there's lots of all for one, one for all. And I think making sure that the decision is being made with that person about what's right for them, without anybody around them that could affect that decision, i.e. make them feel sort of guilty or that they should carry on. I don't think it's helpful, unless they really want their friend there, to have anybody else around, because it's quite a kind of sensitive thing for them, I find.
And that's really good advice, I think. And equally, I've had it the other way around, where people are actually medically okay to carry on, but come to you because they want you to tell them that they need to go down. And then at that point, it's a different conversation, because you're like, no, actually, from a medical perspective, you're fine. You can keep going up.
Up you go.
Keep going. Yeah, but it's a carrot and stick, isn't it, sometimes? And again, like informing people of the possible consequences of ascending and stuff. And I think I mentioned in that, your headache's going to get worse, you might start vomiting, you might get seizures. My classic line is like, people are like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? And I'm like, seizures, coma, death.
Well, they asked you, didn't they? And they got the answers.
I mean,
it's true. I also have written on my little list of notes from this camp. I don't know if this was something your group shared, but by this point there was a few people, I'm going to say also including myself, who hadn't pooed. So I had a queue of very constipated group members who I'd kind of prepared the medical kit very well, assuming, big mountain in Africa, I'd thought diarrhea, but I hadn't thought that constipation was likely to be a major issue. So I had, I think, 2 or 3 sachets of Movicol, and I'd used 2 of them on somebody who still hadn't pooed, and this was a disaster. I was like, I've got 1 more sachet of Movicol, and lots of people who haven't pooed, including myself. So I had I think we talked about it, but I had to recommend, we were already doing exercise and I didn't want to send people sprinting at altitude. So I had to suggest, lots of veg, which luckily you can do on Kili, lots of fresh fruit. And because it's such a high carb diet, I basically told them that they shouldn't really have carbs and they needed to drink even more than normal, and then have loads of strong coffees.
Telling your group to drink so much water, like 4 to 5 litres a day.
I know, exactly. And then strong coffee, and it worked. And I'm glad to say everybody pooed that day, and it felt like a huge win. It was playing on my mind, the thought that I'd had this group of people, and I was thinking, I can't be the medic that evacuates people from Kilimanjaro because they haven't had a poo. But it was all was okay in the end. Coffee saved the day.
I remember you coming into my my little medical tent, and you're like, "Ffyon, how many sashes of avocado you got?"
Like, it was just constipation was not on my radar.
No. Well, yeah, it just must be a combination of the diet and maybe like a little bit of dehydration, something like that. But I was saying to you earlier that coffee is an essential component to any expedition. Also for this reason, it's a pretty good laxative. Just get some strong coffee. Get that down you.
Yeah. I know.
Oh, yeah. I remember the toilet.
Really helped the heart rate.
Oh yeah, really helped the heart rate. I remember the toilets being a bit grim in pretty much most of the camps actually, but I mean they were. You can only complain so much because they had a roof, they had 4 walls, a hole in the ground that you squatted over, and even if there was a seat, I'm not sure you particularly wanted to sit on it. It's a sort of squat and hover situation.
It's true.
And yeah, it's pretty grim. There was literally piss and shit up the walls. I was like, oh,
there was. Amazing it exists though, in terms of
amazing
camp hygiene.
Yes, and like I had to keep reminding my group all the time about alcohol gel. Like, take it to the toilet before you eat, like after you eat, and after you go to the toilet. Even before you go to the toilet in those places, they were grim.
Yeah, I used to get mine to all, if people were walking back from the loo or they just had a wee against a rock or something, they would all they'd all sort of offer or say, "Have you washed your hands?" And by the end of it, I thought that's actually really good. It's really, really useful. They've been so indoctrinated into washing their hands that they're now monitoring each other for hand washing for the overall good of the group. Yeah.
And you can make it a bit of a joke too, can't you? You can be a little bit naggy, but like make it a little bit of a joke. And I actually had the opposite problem, I think, in my group on this day, in that like a few people started developing diarrhea, and it's pretty exciting. So
you hadn't nicked all our mother coal, had you?
No, I don't think I had. No. But yeah, funny how we had very different problems in the gastrointestinal department. We've talked a lot about bowel movements on this.
I know, we are medics. It's fine.
Yeah, we're completely comfortable with this stuff, aren't we? Cool. Yeah, and then we went up to Karanga on that. Oh yeah, Barranco Wall. So much fun.
So good. I loved it. There was lots of people who weren't used to exposure, because it is quite exposed, that bit, and there was a few tiers, but again the group were just they were amazing. They were really motivating each other, and there was a lot of kind of mutual support, and even people who weren't necessarily sort of best of friends when we were walking along the flat were really supporting each other, and that's such a nice thing to witness, isn't it?
It's a big achievement for them too. If they're not good with height, to be able to do that, it's really. And I remember it's not helped by the fact that you've got porters in flip-flops running past you with like huge bundles on their head, like running up this scramble that everybody's kind of a bit nervous about.
They are truly amazing human beings, aren't they? The porters.
Incredible. Nobody would. Well, I wouldn't have got a Kili without porters. 100%, no. If I was carrying so for anyone who maybe hasn't been to Kili, you don't carry your full rucksack. There's usually a porter who carries your full rucksack, and you carry a day sack sort of thing. So you're not carrying an awful lot of weight. And I'm not ashamed to say, even on the summit day, I was super struggling, and I was feeling like I was going to puke at any second. And the porter offered to take my day sack off me, and I was like, "Yes, please, mate. Thank you very much. Take that." So yeah, they are amazing. They get us up and down that mountain.
They do, correct.
So then we go to Karanga camp, and I remember, I haven't put this in the voice memo, but I remember I had a porter who had tonsillitis and who came to me, and I sort of had a quick look in his throat, and definite tonsillitis, and sort of said he'd had a sore throat for a few days and a fever, and I gave him some antibiotics out of the medical kit.
Nice.
Now, I'd been told, I think, that some companies were a little bit funny about using the medical kit for porters because they sort of said, oh, no, it's only for the participants. Had you sort of heard that too?
I had. I imagine you might feel similar, but I feel, yeah, even if that was the kind of ethos of the company you're working for, I think as you just said, these are the people that get you up the mountain. So I think you've got a moral obligation anyway, and just a general being a member of the human race, that if you have the stuff to make somebody feel better and they're supporting your trip up Kili, then I definitely would always treat them, I think, exactly as you did. Is that your thoughts?
Yeah, I had no hesitations about treating him.
I think any company that says we shouldn't be treating the support staff, I don't think they're probably companies that I'd want to work for.
Absolutely. All right, so we don't stop at Karanga. Some groups do stop at Karanga for a night, and we carried.
Yeah, we just got food, didn't we?
Yeah, we got some food, got some lunch, and then we cracked on up to Barafu. But then I think I say in that maybe it would have been nice to stay a night there just for a little bit of extra acclimatization.
Yeah.
An extra day could make a difference, I guess. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you're also thinking, like, get me off this mountain, but also you are, I think maybe thinking that less if you weren't quite so exhausted.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, I hadn't showered in like 4 days at this point, and I'm caked in dust and sweat. Like, it's only going to get worse from here. So, the old baby wipes are only doing so much. So, the longer you spend out on the mountain, the longer you're at altitude. Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off, isn't it? But, I think I probably would prefer to maybe do a slightly longer route next time.
Yeah, I agree.
So we get up to Barafu, which is called the base camp for the summit. And there is one camp slightly higher than Barafu, which is very small, and I think you need a little special permit for. But most people will start their summit night from Barafu camp. Right, so we'll dive in here and see what my thoughts were on
summit night,
Barafu and summit night. And as you said, so yeah, we get there. You only get about 2 or 3 hours sleep, because I think you go to bed at about 9 and you get up at midnight, don't you?
So I remember saying to you, it was devastating news. We were a very slow group, we were told, which is, I'd probably agree with. And they said usually we'd set off at midnight, but because everyone's so slow, or because some people were so slow, we're going to set off at 10:30, which meant that we had about maybe, I don't know what time dinner finished, maybe 7. So we had about 2 hours, an hour and a half to nap. I remember thinking, oh no. But somehow I fell asleep.
I remember gleefully telling my group that the other group was so slow they had to start early, that we were the fast group.
I know. Such a competition, isn't it?
Always. Okay, so let's see what I was thinking at this point.
So we've come down from Kilimanjaro after summit night, which was day 5, where we went from Barafu camp, started at midnight with about 3 hours of sleep. Barafu's about 4,600, and we had the longest, most horrible, cold, never-ending slog at snail's pace, poly pace, up hundreds and hundreds of switchbacks, steep hill, with about 1,200 meters of ascent, which took us about 8 hours or so, and was honestly the worst night of my life. We were stopping about once every hour for about 5 minutes, and you could only really stop for about 5 minutes before your feet started to freeze and your hands started to freeze. You just had to get as much water down you and snacks down you as you could at that point. It was really hard to eat because I just felt really sick. Ended up taking some ondansetron and had a headache as well by about hour 3 or 4. So took some paracetamol and ibuprofen, which seemed to help quite a lot, and the ondansetron helped a lot as well. I really struggled with being able to actually get myself enough water and food in breaks, because I was finding that every time we had a break, they would ask me to just go and have a quick look at somebody. And then by the time I'd finished doing that, the break was over and it was time to move on. So having quick access, easy to open, and things that don't freeze, snacks, was essential. My Camelback froze and couldn't use it. My Nalgene bottle started to freeze, but didn't freeze all the way through, so could still get that open. So I had about a litre or so in that, but then struggled to close it because the ice formed around the top. It was just a matter of a mental battle, slogging uphill, just putting one foot in front of the other, and just telling yourself that you didn't want to go down, you didn't want to turn around, that you wanted to get to the summit, and just waiting for the next break. The turning point, I think, in that night was seeing the sunrise. It start to come up over the horizon, and it start to feel like there might be a little bit of a chance of us actually getting to the top. I was just staring at my feet, putting one foot in front of the other, literally toe to heel. Just couldn't move my feet any further than that. The headlamp was doing weird things to my vision, where it would get lightheaded or dizzy if I turned my head too quickly, and I was just staring at the feet in front of me. I was trying to keep an eye on the people in front of me, who were sometimes falling asleep whilst they were walking, staggering about the place, so sometimes had to sort of just put an arm out, keep them in a straight line, and then that becomes really difficult to tell whether they're actually ataxic or whether they're just sleepwalking. And the same with hallucinations. Are they dreaming because they're asleep and walking, or are they properly hallucinating things as they're going up? And quite a few actually said they did, but they didn't mention it to me at the time, unfortunately. I had one girl see dead body of one of her teammates. Great. Had another see faces in the rocks. Another was seeing animals in the rocks. Again, just don't know if these are like dreams or hallucinations. Just really hard to tell. My sort of cut-off point was whether or not they had a headache and were vomiting. Because I think if you were going to get severe haste, then you needed to have a headache and be vomiting, as well as having hallucinations. So when we got up to Stella Point, most of the team were pretty drained, very drained, and were very pleased to see the top of Stella Point. We had a very quick break, and then we could see the summit from there. So we had a little push along a ridge around the edge of the crater rim to get to Uhuru Peak. And that was described as being a lot easier than what we'd done. Stella Point was sort of the tough bit up to Stella Point. But I think it was harder than I expected because I was so short of breath. I've never been so short of breath in my life, like just panting with absolute minimal exertion. Moving so slowly and still having to stop and catch my breath every sort of 10, 20 meters, something like that. And the summit just did not seem to be getting any closer. It was my chest was so tight, chest pain, a little bit dizzy, a little bit lightheaded. Felt like my heart was going about 180 most of the way along that summit ridge. And then finally made it to the summit. I think pretty much everyone else was taking Diamox. And then on the way down, the groups all split up at this point into sort of 4 or 5 different little sections, and I tried to stick with the sort of biggest group and keep an eye on all of them. When everybody got back down, we had some food, we had some rest, and just checked in with everybody to see if they were okay, if they needed anything. And we proceeded on down to High Camp, which is about 3,800, something like that. So all in all, we had a 15-hour day of walking, and we started at midnight and we didn't finish until about 4 p.m. So it was a really, really, really long day. And I was really struggling at points, and that was definitely the hardest thing that I've ever done. And combined with the fact that I had to look after other people as well as look after myself, it was really difficult. I'm really proud of myself for what I achieved, and that I got to the top, and that everybody was safe, and that we had no major medical disasters.
Wow. I think that it's so valuable that you did these things because, the voice notes, because as with all traumatic experiences, I've kind of, with hindsight, I've kind of glossed over quite how hard that is, and how and I imagine you probably have too until you listen back to these.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm like, oh my God, did I even have fun?
Yeah, I know. When we met up recently, we were like, oh my God, it was so great. But we hadn't re-listened to these voice messages, had we? No, I do remember it was really, really hard. And I think we do have to bear in mind it is a big, big, big day, isn't it? It breaks any of the rules of any of the mountain textbooks about safe ascent profiles, and it's dangerous, isn't it? So it's not surprising that you end up with that constellation of illness in a group of 30.
And I think as well, just hearing that bit at the end there where I'm saying, it's the hardest thing I've ever done and it's sort of 15-hour day, etc. Like, we never work for 15 hours. We don't have shifts that are 15 hours long. Then
Thank God.
At altitude, climbing a mountain,
sleep deprived,
sleep deprived, and looking after a group of like 30 people. That is not EU Working Time Directive compliant.
That is not compliant. It's not compliant with anything, and it does make you wonder, like, why do we do that? Why do we continue to do these things? But it is amazing. Summit nights are always punishing, aren't they? But they are worth it in an odd type of way.
It's type 2 fun for sure, isn't it?
Definitely type 2 fun. And I think the bit for, it's obviously the common sense, isn't it? But trying to do your job as a medic and make good, safe decisions and deliver maybe not good, but safe clinical care when you're hypoxic, cold, and experiencing all the same things that your group are, really does add another dimension to the challenge, I think. And it definitely builds sort of tenacity and resilience, doesn't it?
Definitely. And it was good. I think we had the option of calling a base camp medic back down in Moshi. I don't think I actually used that option at any point during the trip, but if we needed...
No, I don't know if you noticed there was only signal probably for a couple of hours in a week, so I'm not sure. Not sure how useful that would have been, but yeah, the option was there. I'm sure there'd have been, the locals might have known where we could get signal.
And we were relying on the guides and the porters for phone signal, which I think is half of... They didn't have radios or anything like that to sort of speak to each other. So when I was mentioning about like one part of my group got unwell, but I wasn't told about it until actually when we were back down from the summit. That was one of the things that I reflected that we could have done a bit better, was the communication between the sort of different fragments of my group, because I was only with one bit of the group. I had no idea what was going on with the other bits of the group, and I was relying completely on the porters and the guides to tell me, which didn't happen.
That was a challenge for me. I think as I mentioned earlier, was with the slower group, and the group split into two, and the front group had a really kind of dynamic, we could hear them at the front. They were singing, there was lots of singing, excited chat, and I was with the slower group at the back who were obviously struggling, which meant that it was a far slower pace and lots more breaks. And I actually found that really hard, as I found really regular breaks, which is what some of the group wanted, for me were challenging. So I got cold. I'm a skinny little runt, so actually stopping every few minutes for me was a bit of a disaster. I was sort of having to do star jumps to keep warm. And they, I mean,
I was
the
wearing
trip,
2 down jackets. I was wearing everything I owned. It was on
yeah.
my body. It was so cold.
Well, it was taking every last ounce of my energy to be like encouraging and motivating, because we were going so slowly, and I could see the group up in front having loads of fun, and I was determined that that's part of the role, isn't it? The mental support and the motivation. So I was trying to g up this group, but they were obviously very down in the dumps. Yes, I was trying to g them up, and I was probably being incredibly annoying, but being very sort of bouncy, trying to get them singing, and it was definitely falling on deaf ears. But I was talking about the kind of motivation of the sunrise and how they were going to feel amazing. And to be honest, the morale in the group changes so much when that sun peaks over and suddenly you're it's not even the bit when it starts getting light, it's when you feel the sun on your skin and you start feeling warm. And it felt for me like quite a kind of emotional experience. I was like, I'm actually going to summit Kilimanjaro. Wow, as the doctor, what a dream.
It's definitely the same for me when we get to that stellar point and then we started seeing the sunrise and you could feel the warmth on your skin and the starts getting a bit lighter and you can actually see where you're going. Because I found half the struggle was you just following a trail of headlamps up a black slope and you just couldn't see how high the slope was when it stopped and when it was never ending, But it was
it does feel never ending.
It was an emotional moment when the sun started coming up. It really was. It was
when it was pitch black. I remember not really being able to tell whether the stars were also headlights, and I was like, headlamps, and I was thinking, we've got so far to go. And I was like, oh no, they are stars. It's okay. You don't have to climb into a galaxy. It's okay.
Yeah,
it just feels like it.
Same thing. And I think the tone in your group was definitely similar to mine, who were all kind of hating life at this point. Like I said, they were falling asleep on their feet, but still walking, sort of staggering around the place. Later found out hallucinating dead teammates.
Yeah.
Not the ideal vibe.
No, mine had nicer hallucinations. They hallucinated. One of them was hallucinating about all of the boulders being golden retrievers.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it's quite nice, isn't it? It's not a bad hallucination. It's better than corpses.
I think I definitely didn't have it in me at that point to be chirpy and bubbly and sort of motivating. The best I could manage was sort of shout at them and be like, "Does anyone want to go down?" And they were like, "No." I was like, "Does anyone want to go down?" And they were like, "No." I was like, "Okay, good. That negative motivation. That's what we're going for."
That's quite good.
And and I was like just trying to concentrate on not puking most of the way. On Danzatron really works.
Yeah,
kind of on Danzatron now.
Completely. That trio you mentioned in your voice clip, paracetamol, ibuprofen on Danzatron. I don't think I'd have got to the top without that. Well, I would, but there would have been a lot of vomiting, I think.
Yeah, and I made sure that my team had paracetamol on Danzatron and ibuprofen themselves. So I think it was one of the previous medics had given us this tip to give out on Danzatron the night before. So give them a pill in the pocket type thing.
I did that too. We called it the party pack.
The party pack.
The party pack, yep. They loved it. I was actually, as I say, it was probably falling on deaf ears, but I found in terms of managing the breathlessness that any altitude trip I've done since, I've always used breathing techniques, and it, even though when you start trying to tell people they think you're a sort of new age hippie weirdo, it does help so much. If you're trying to force air in, and the way you were, I remember really narrowing. You've got so much time to think. I remember narrowing my lips, thinking I'm going to give myself some PEEP to maximize. Maximize my gas exchange. And I was thinking,
I'm going to be a pink puffer. That's
what
I'm going to do.
Exactly that.
I did have one member of the group who's doing Wim Hof techniques.
Did it help?
He thinks it helped. Yeah.
I think breathing techniques work, definitely. Maybe also associated with on Danzatron and 2 pain relievers.
I found it really hard to keep track of who had what when as well. So I was very reliant on what time did you have that paracetamol? Because when you've got like 25 group members, and there was no chance of me taking gloves off to make notes of what time people had, and like it was too cold for my phone to work, so there was no chance of any of that happening. So I was very reliant on people remembering what time they'd had paracetamol and ibuprofen, ondansetron, etc.
Definitely. And that I think you mentioned being slightly irritated with some of the porters for not sort of letting you know about how unwell some people were until they got back down. So I remember our slower group getting to the top, and then porters sort of carrying or manhandling two of the group down, sort of attached to oxygen. And I was thinking, these are the people I really need to know about, but they were not bothered. They sort of sprinted past me, and then they were sort of recovering anyway. Yeah, it was all quite stressful. But I said to the guide that was nearest me, like, I need to know about people who are unwell, and he was like, no, they'll be fine, which is, as your patients get whizzed downhill past you, is not necessarily what you want to hear, but they did. Everyone perked up, so I was told if anyone was particularly unwell, the group would have known, but it is slightly anxiety inducing. It's not good.
Obviously they've done it many times before, and they probably, like, they all recognize the signs, and they know what to do, put people on oxygen and get them down the hill. But it's I don't know if I feel slightly obsolete if they're doing that, or it's like, I'm actually meant to be responsible for this element of things, and I can only do something about it if you tell me about it.
Yeah, that's it. And I think they said because I'd checked the kind of communication path between the two groups, and they did have phones, and they said there was signal, but I don't think to them that if they do that, every few weeks, I don't think it seemed abnormal. So it's just they're so used to taking someone down a few hundred meters and watching them recover. I don't think they even let the medic necessarily know unless they don't recover with descent, which is scary. But they're probably so used to doing it, as you say, without a medic. And then we're going to have to discuss the descent, that scree. Oh my God!
You know what? The descent wasn't. I wasn't that. The ascent I hated, but the descent I was like, oh, cool, like hard bit's done. Like now I just have to get down the mountain.
Oh, I think mine was the other way around. I quite, in a sadistic way, enjoyed quite a lot of the ascent, but the descent on the scree, I think I was with my same group who'd had enough of being on Kilimanjaro by that stage, and one of them refused to walk any further and said that we needed to get her a helicopter. And I obviously was not prepared to get a helicopter for somebody who was fully capable of walking, but just refusing. So there was a lot of persuasion and, well, every type of communication strategy in my armory to try and encourage her down the mountain.
I'm very much, I don't think my patience would have lasted that long. I think I would have been very much like, right.
It was. I think I was firm by the end.
Yeah, I remember you saying to me, actually, you said that you think that maybe you'd started things being too approachable. That's the best way to put it, isn't it? And you were sort of like,
yeah, there's definitely
problems, and then they kind of loaded you up with way too much work and things that they probably could have dealt with themselves, and they became quite reliant on you.
Yeah, I think I fell into that trap, and I think that was my first proper trip, and I think I fell into all the traps that people tell you about, and and I think since then I've sort of learned a lot of those things, that actually it's really important that people do take kind of ownership of their own health like they would at home, rather than going into a sort of almost childlike mode where because there's a medic there, they don't need to look after themselves in any way, because actually A, it makes it harder for you, but B, it means that if they're not taking ownership of their health, it's far harder to keep them healthy for the duration of the trip.
So you managed to persuade your person to keep going and not require a helicopter.
Yeah, we did.
It doesn't exist on Kili anyway, does it? Not a thing.
No, that's true. And then I remember, so probably the hardest bit of the trip for me, yours was the ascent by the sounds of it. Mine was when we got back to camp. There was as soon we got there, very well, me and my slower group got there probably a few hours after the others, and got back and suddenly got approached by the tent mates of 5 different sort of tents. So 5 people needed urgent medical reviews. And I was thinking, oh, don't cry, Francis. I was thinking, I am exhausted. And because we've been in the sun for so long, much longer than probably other people, because we've been so slow, I had a thumping headache. I'd run out of water. I was probably very dehydrated. I hadn't had enough to eat because lots of my snacks froze. Turns out Mars bars are quite hard to gnaw on when they're frozen
Nature
solid.
Valley bars, the same. I had a Nature Valley bar that wasn't good.
Yeah. And then got back, and all of these people needed reviewing. And as I say, it was my first big trip. So even though I felt dreadful, I didn't go and eat anything. I went to go and see them straight away. And actually, in hindsight, all of them just had the same as me. They'd had too much sun, they hadn't drunk enough, and they'd had probably a big change in altitude. And essentially, I told all of them, after quite a thorough review, that they needed to drink 2 litres of water, some electrolytes, they needed to eat something, and they needed some pain relief. But actually, that's exactly what I needed too. And in subsequent trips since then, I would now treat myself before I go and see those people, because it's actually the decisions I'd have been making at that stage. I really did have a thumping head and I did not feel good. And I think if somebody had been truly unwell, then possibly I'd have missed it, because I wasn't in the right frame of mind to be making good, sensible medical decisions. And that was a kind of good illustration of why you need to look after yourself, I think, to me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a lesson that I've brought back to real life in the emergency department. It feels like it's a dream, and then you come back to real life and you have to go back to work. But is that we are very prone to putting patients before ourselves. I think we pretty much all do that. We will go without a break. We will go without peeing. We will, take that extra shift to help our colleagues out, or help the department out. And we often do it at our own expense. And that is not sustainable over a career. And I think it gets really magnified on an expedition where, you are struggling, physically and mentally yourself. But those kind of principles and bringing that back to your day job is really important as well. And you already mentioned it, just it improves resilience too, I think, because you're more aware of what you can do and what you're capable of and what your limits are and kind of what you need to survive and thrive, I guess.
Yeah, that's really well put.
So yeah, I can see in your notes here you've put the descent was grim.
I know, always an eloquent writer. Yes, it was grim. It felt like hours. Well, it was hours and hours of scree. But I think probably my mindset then, I think I'd probably exhausted my bucket of patience by that stage, and probably needed that bit of time to myself we talked about by that stage.
Yeah, and there's very few things that are actually truly urgent or emergency type things.
Exactly.
So I did have one slight emergency, I suppose, on the way down, which was one of the group collapsed. Was, not good. And then I went over. We're on a scree slope coming down a hill, and she'd been doing okay, but she said that she had seen a couple of black spots in her vision, kind of transiently, and I was like, "Oh, that doesn't sound too good." But she'd eaten enough, she'd drank enough, and then she just collapsed and went over. Sort of did my sort of primary survey, ABCDE type thing. Established that she was breathing and she was talking and she was following commands, and she'd just had a bit of a fainting episode. So she was kind of on the slope with her head up the slope. I rotated her and I put her head down the slope, so I had a ready-made tilt, which was great.
Using the scree.
Got some blood back to her brain, and she came around and she was okay. It's a matter of seconds, really. And all of the other group members were sort of watching this happen, and then I sent her down the mountain with a couple of porters to help her down. And they were like, "Wow, like that was amazing! It's like you're a real doctor." I was like, "What did you think that I did?"
You just put that stethoscope around your neck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite funny. Yeah, so then we get back down the mountain, and I cried at the top. So you may have cried at the bottom, or nearly cried at the bottom, but I cried at the top, and that's the first mountain I've ever cried at the top of. I got up there, and like I said, I was feeling so bad. Like, I genuinely think my heart rate was like 180. I was so short of breath, and I had so like chest tightness, chest pain. And yeah, then got to the top and like touched the little wooden bracket thing that says Ahuru Peak on it, and I was like, oh my god, like there was moments when I definitely thought I wasn't going to make it to the top here, and this is a massive achievement, and yeah, cried.
It is a massive achievement.
Hypoxia does that to the brain, makes you emotional and crazy, and yeah, but it was a big achievement, so I was super pleased to get there.
Yeah, and it absolutely is, isn't it? And also, I think it's never a given as the doctor, is it, that you're going to make it to the top. So it does feel like a kind of double win. If your group are safe and well, and you also manage to summit, that's a very good trip, isn't it?
That is. And we'd heard, I think, about other doctors not making it to the top already from previous groups. So, yeah, we knew it definitely wasn't a given. And then we get down the mountain and we do our porter's tipping ceremony, and we have a beer at the bottom.
Wasn't that lovely?
Yeah,
very hot beer.
Yeah, not surprised, really. And everybody kind of spirits get lifted, don't they? And everybody kind of has a nice little celebration in the evening. You had your emergency medical tuk-tuk ride.
Emergency tuk-tuk ride, yeah. Only the best.
So what do we think we've learnt from Kili?
So I think we definitely have mentioned probably the most important, which is, well, the most important for all future trips, which I think both of us felt, and it is such a cliche, but I think when you experience it, you realise why every senior doctor tells you that you do have to, if you're going to provide good quality, safe medical care, then you definitely do need to, like, always look after yourself first, and make sure you're fed, watered, in case of a headache, paracetamol, and the only cases where you're probably not going to do that are the real life-threatening emergencies, and thankfully they're pretty rare, aren't they? And that's what this is, the same as what they tell you in ED, isn't it? Like, actually, the only times that you can't have a break is not when the ambulance queue is huge. It's like if there is actually multiple resus life-threatening illnesses which need you there now, but any other circumstance you can take your break on time, and you should.
It's always going to be as bad as it always seems to be in ED, you know what I mean? That like the list never gets smaller, the wait never gets shorter. It's always bad,
but we love it.
We love it for some reason. We're obviously type 2 fun people, but yeah, it's looking after yourself is number one, isn't it? And I think that was definitely my takeaway from Kili as well, is that and actually Mountain Rescue really emphasised this in their teaching, is that you look after yourself, then you look after your patient. You look yourself, then team, then patient. And I think that's a really helpful framework in thinking about your priorities as an expedition medic, because there is a tendency to think that I need to be the hero. I need to be one that's strong and that's like looking after everybody else, and that I can't be seen to be weak or struggling or anything like that, because I'm the hero caregiver.
I've got to be there for my group all the time.
Yes, but actually that's not true. And I guess so. I've got two final questions, which are going to be: what advice would you have for a medic that's climbing Kili? And would you do it again?
Oh, good ones. So I'm going to give a light-hearted answer, but it actually is genuinely true. Constipation happens on Kilimanjaro. Constipation happens in Africa, and now my medical kit is an entirely different kit. So prepare yourself for both aspects of bowel pathology. And would I do it again? Yes, hands down, I absolutely would. I think we've hopefully painted a realistic, not too negative picture, I hope, because there's some soaring highs, aren't there? It's just really, really hard. So I definitely would do it again, and it was offered to me only a couple of months after coming back, and I think it was to you as well. And I wasn't quite over the physical and mental trauma of Kilimanjaro at that stage. So the answer is yes, I would do it again, and I will do it again. I have no doubt. But I'd like to try a different route for interest and also for altitude. The more I know about altitude medicine, the less sensible that route of Kilimanjaro seems. So I'd like to try a longer and different route. But yes, hands down, I would do it again. It's an amazing mountain. How about you?
Yes, like you said, we were offered a trip a couple of weeks or months after, and I was like, it's too soon. I'm not over the trauma yet. So yes, I would do it again, but I don't think I would do the Machame route. I think I would quite like to try the Lemosho route. I think that looks cool. I think that's like 7 days, something like that. And I think I feel a lot better prepared as an expedition medic now going into it. I think it's not that long ago that we did it, but it was definitely a bit of a trial by fire because we were both quite green at the time. But now I feel a little bit more ready for it. So I would do it again.
Me too.
And then advice for any budding medics going up Kili: it is a great experience. I think we've probably maybe seemed quite negative, but
hopefully realistic.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned, the most beautiful views of the Milky Way, gorgeous sunsets over the mountain above the clouds, that kind of high when you get to Stellar Point and the sun rises and you realise you're going to make it, and the achievement of getting to the top and keeping everybody safe, and the kind of team aspects of it as well, the team bonding, seeing everybody getting on well, looking after each other, nice aspects of humanity to see in a tough situation.
I also think that if there's been some sort of negative aspects, I think it's because there's some of these things we've discussed are what I wanted to know before I went up, and actually, so hopefully people listening to this who are about to go up Kilimanjaro or apply for jobs doing it will be kind of better prepared for a more realistic ascent. Yeah,
definitely. I hope so. Like you said at the beginning, there wasn't a lot out there when we went up. A lot of resources for medics going up Kili, but there are some really good resources out there now. Hopefully this podcast is one of them, and we've not just sort of rambled and nattered and giggled too much. But I would also point you in the direction of the UIAA, so the International Federation for Climbing and Alpinism. They've got a series of documents, but they're specific medical advice about some mountains in the world. So there's one on Kili, and there's also one on Aconcagua, and I think there's one on Mira Peak, might be Island Peak, but also on their website. So I definitely point you in the direction of those. They're very useful, very practical advice, and there's some good guidance on there for altitude medicine as well. Of course, there's lots of other good stuff on the WEM Academy and the WEM website, and keep an eye out for the Kilimanjaro medical briefing blog, and I'm hoping there's going to be another podcast about Kilimanjaro with Dr. Jeremy Windsor, who is the author of the UIAA Safety and Success on Kilimanjaro paper.
Awesome.
Any final thoughts, Francis?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute privilege, and I hope we'll be on a mountain somewhere again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for giving up your time, coming on the podcast, having a good chat through and reminiscing about our time on Kili.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Ffyon.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars and indeed a collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical and performance medicine. Thanks again.